The first knock came just before midnight, when the storm had swallowed every road to Lone Pine Ranch. Jacob Hale opened the door and found a woman collapsing in the snow, a little girl locked in her arms and a blood-stained medical journal clutched to her chest. Before she lost consciousness, she whispered, "Please, don't let them find us tonight." By sunrise, 3 riders were already coming through the whiteout toward his gate. Morning came slowly over Lone Pine Ranch, gray and bitter beneath a sky that looked carved from iron. Inside the house, Evelyn Brooks woke beside the dying fire and reached for Lily before she opened her eyes fully. The little girl was still asleep beneath a heavy quilt, one hand curled around the edge as if even dreams could not convince her they were safe. Only then did Evelyn remember where they were. The ranch, the stranger who had opened the door, the journal. Her hand moved at once toward the worn leather satchel on the floor beside the sofa. It was still there. Jacob Hale stood near the stove, pouring coffee into a chipped enamel cup. He did not ask why she had come. He did not ask who was searching for her. He only told her the roads were still buried and that Lily should eat before they discussed anything else. The kindness unsettled her more than suspicion would have. For weeks, every door had closed before she reached it. Evelyn had once been welcome in nearly every farmhouse within 20 miles of Whitmore Creek. She had delivered babies through blizzards, sat beside feverish children until dawn, and crossed frozen rivers because frightened mothers had no one else to call. People had trusted her hands. Then Margaret Whitmore died. Margaret had been young, wealthy, and carrying the first grandchild of the most powerful ranching family in the county. Her labor began badly and grew worse with every passing hour. Evelyn watched the color drain from her face. She watched her pulse weaken. She begged Dr. Edwin Mercer to change the medicine and send for another physician. Mercer refused. He told her she was a midwife, not a doctor. He gave Margaret another dose. Before sunrise, both mother and child were dead. By noon, grief had already become accusation. The Whitmore family claimed Evelyn had interfered with the doctor's treatment. Mercer said she had delayed his instructions. Men who had never entered the birthing room spoke as if they had witnessed every moment. No one asked Evelyn to show her notes. No one wanted to hear that she had recorded every dose, every symptom, every change in Margaret's breathing. The sheriff questioned her for less than 10 minutes. The churchwomen who once invited her to supper stopped looking at her. Children repeated words they heard from their parents. Murderer, widow, bad luck. Lily heard all of it. One afternoon, boys stood outside their cottage shouting that Evelyn had killed Mrs. Whitmore. Lily pressed both hands over her ears and cried until Evelyn carried her into the back room. That night, someone threw a stone through the front window. A note had been tied around it. "Leave before the sheriff comes." Evelyn packed before dawn. She left nearly everything behind. Her dresses, her cooking pot, the small table her husband had built before he died. She took Lily's blanket, 2 photographs, a loaf of bread, and the leather medical journal. Nothing else mattered. Now, sitting in Jacob Hale's kitchen, she stared into the steam rising from the coffee he had placed in front of her. He waited. At last, he asked the only question that mattered. "Do they believe you killed her?" Evelyn's fingers tightened around the cup. "They want everyone else to believe it." Jacob watched her carefully. "That's not what I asked." She looked toward Lily, still sleeping by the fire. Then she reached down and rested her palm on the leather satchel. "They are not chasing me because they think I am guilty." For the first time, Jacob's expression changed. Evelyn lowered her voice. "They are chasing this journal." The rider appeared shortly after breakfast. Jacob saw him before anyone else did, a dark figure moving slowly along the buried road while the morning wind swept loose snow across the pasture. The man stopped several yards outside the gate. He wore a sheriff's badge. But he never dismounted. Jacob stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind him. The rider pulled a folded paper from his coat and announced that he was searching for Evelyn Brooks on suspicion of murder. He said the sheriff wanted her returned to town immediately. Jacob did not reach for the paper. He asked where the warrant had been signed. The rider hesitated. That was enough. Jacob had known enough lawmen in his life to understand that a man carrying lawful authority rarely became nervous when asked to show it. He told the rider that no one would be taken from Lone Pine Ranch without proper papers. The man stared toward the house, then turned his horse and rode away. Inside, Evelyn had heard every word. She was already gathering Lily's blanket when Jacob returned. "We should leave. The road isn't open. We'll walk." Lily won't make 5 miles in this cold. Evelyn stopped folding the blanket. I won't have you lose your ranch because of me. Jacob hung his coat beside the stove. I haven't lost anything yet. You don't know what they can do. No. He looked at her calmly. But I know what I won't do. She waited. I won't send a mother and child into a snowstorm because a stranger showed me a badge. The words left her with no answer. Jacob did not offer charity. Instead, he led her across the yard to an empty bunkhouse room with a narrow bed, an iron stove, and a window overlooking the north pasture. It was plain, but dry. He told her she could stay if she worked. That changed everything. Evelyn straightened. What kind of work? The kitchen needs help. My medicine cabinet is a disaster. The ranch books haven't balanced in 2 months. He glanced toward the barn. And the horses trust almost nobody. For the first time since arriving, something close to amusement touched her face. That sounds less like one job. It is. She accepted. By noon, Evelyn had scrubbed the kitchen table, reorganized the pantry, and marked 3 spoiled medicine bottles that should have been thrown away months earlier. She never asked for special treatment. When Cal Turner, the oldest hand on the ranch, muttered that Jacob was inviting trouble into his house, she pretended not to hear him. She carried firewood. She repaired Lily's torn mitten. She helped serve supper. Slowly, the men stopped watching her every time she crossed the room. Then a shout came from the barn. One of the younger colts had collapsed inside its stall. The animal kicked weakly against the straw while 2 ranch hands tried to hold it down. Evelyn reached the stall before Jacob. She placed one hand against the colt's neck, watched its breathing, then lifted a clump of damp hay from the floor. She smelled it once. Her expression changed. Jacob saw it. What is it? Evelyn looked toward the feed bin. This horse isn't sick. She held the hay beneath the lantern. Someone had mixed something dark among the dried grass. Her voice became very quiet. He's been poisoned. Evelyn moved before anyone else understood what she had found. She ordered one of the ranch hands to bring warm water and another to fetch charcoal from the stove. Cal Turner stared at her as though he expected an explanation, but she gave him none. The colt's breathing had already grown shallow. There was no time for argument. She crushed the charcoal into the water, added salt, and worked carefully until the frightened animal swallowed enough of the mixture to matter. Then she stayed beside him, one hand resting against his neck while the men watched his chest rise and fall. For nearly an hour, nothing changed. Then the colt drew one deeper breath. Another followed. The violent trembling began to ease. Cal slowly removed his hat. I've worked horses 30 years, he said. Never seen anybody do that. Evelyn wiped her hands on an old cloth. I didn't cure him. Jacob looked toward the feed bin. You bought him time. She nodded. And whoever poisoned him expected him to die. The barn became very quiet. Jacob carried the tainted hay outside and examined it beneath the pale afternoon light. Mixed among the grass were crushed leaves with a bitter smell Evelyn recognized from cases she had seen years earlier near Laramie. A small amount weakened an animal slowly. Enough could stop the heart. By sunset, Jacob was riding the perimeter of Lone Pine Ranch alone. Fresh snow should have preserved every track. Near the north pasture, he found something worse. A stretch of fence wire had been cut and bent back into place so carefully that a man passing at a distance would never notice. Beneath it, faint hoof marks disappeared where wind had already begun filling them with snow. Someone had entered his land without using the gate. When Jacob returned to the house, Evelyn was sitting beside the fireplace with the leather medical journal across her knees. Lily slept nearby. For several minutes, neither adult spoke. Jacob removed his gloves and placed them on the table. This wasn't random. Evelyn kept her eyes on the journal. No. You know what was in that hay? Yes. And whoever followed you here knows enough about this ranch to get inside without being seen. Her fingers tightened around the cracked cover. I never meant for this to reach you. Jacob poured coffee into 2 cups. It reached me when someone crossed my fence. He placed 1 cup beside her and sat across the room rather than beside her. That small distance mattered. He was not demanding the truth. He was giving her room to choose it. At last, Evelyn opened the journal. The pages were crowded with dates, names, temperatures, medicines, and notes written in a steady hand. Some entries had been marked with small crosses in the margins. This was every patient I treated that year, she said. Every medicine I gave. Every complication I saw. Every time a doctor changed an order. Jacob listened. Margaret Whitmore is in there? Evelyn turned several pages. Every hour of that night. She did not hand him the book. Instead, she showed him a section near the back. Several pages had been cut away close to the binding. Not torn. Cut. Jacob leaned forward. Who did that? I don't know, but they knew where to look. Evelyn closed the journal again. The official records filed after Margaret died don't match what I wrote. Dosages changed. Times changed. Things I reported disappeared completely. Jacob's expression hardened. Then why didn't you take this to a judge? She looked into the fire. I tried to get help. The answer came slowly. One man agreed to compare the records. He vanished before the meeting. Another told me he would testify that Mercer changed a medicine order. She stopped. Jacob waited. He died 2 days later. No one spoke for a long moment. The fire cracked between them. Outside, the wind dragged snow against the windows. Jacob did not ask whether she believed the deaths were connected. Her silence answered enough. Evelyn rested both hands over the journal. I kept thinking if I carried it long enough, I would eventually find someone who could use it. Jacob looked toward Lily. And instead, it brought them to your door. It brought them to yours. For the first time, Evelyn's composure broke. Only slightly. I can leave before morning. Jacob shook his head. No, you don't understand. I understand someone poisoned one of my horses. His voice remained quiet. I understand someone cut my fence. And I understand that every time you try to protect somebody, you put yourself back on the road. Evelyn looked at him. He pushed the untouched cup of coffee a little closer to her. Tonight, stay. There was no promise beyond that. No demand. Only one safe night. Evelyn finally loosened her hands around the journal, and Jacob noticed something he had missed before. Inside the damaged binding, beneath the places where pages had been cut away, a thin strip of folded paper was still hidden between the leather and the stitching. Someone had searched the journal, but they had not found everything. If you believe Evelyn is hiding the truth to protect someone else, tell us what you think in the comments. And if you were Jacob, would you trust her before knowing what that hidden paper contained? Before either of them could examine it, a wagon wheel creaked outside the house, then stopped. No visitor had been expected that night. Jacob reached the front door before the second knock. The unexpected visitor was old Ben Carter, the blacksmith who had worked the ranches around Whitmore Creek longer than most men could remember. Snow covered his coat and hat, and his wagon carried fresh horseshoes, iron fittings, and a repaired axle Jacob had ordered weeks earlier. Ben had come because one of the younger ranch hands had found strange hoofprints near Miller's Creek. Jacob brought him inside to warm himself. Evelyn remained near the fireplace with Lily while the men discussed the tracks. She said little and kept the medical journal closed beside her chair. Then Ben noticed it. His expression changed. He had seen the leather book years earlier at the Whitmore house, when Margaret was still alive. Evelyn had carried it beneath one arm while moving between sick workers and ranch families who came seeking help. What Ben remembered most clearly was not the journal itself, but Dr. Edwin Mercer's reaction whenever Evelyn opened it. Mercer had always watched her writing, not with curiosity, with fear. The memory left a different kind of silence in the room. If Mercer had feared Evelyn's notes before Margaret died, then the journal had contained something dangerous long before anyone accused Evelyn of murder. Ben left before sunrise. His recollection was not proof, but it was the first independent confirmation that Evelyn had not imagined the uneasiness surrounding her records. The next trouble came before noon. 3 cattle in the south pasture refused to drink. Another staggered away from the trough with its legs trembling beneath its weight. By the time Jacob arrived, 2 more animals were showing the same weakness. The ranch hands blamed the winter. Evelyn did not. She examined the animals, then knelt beside the watering trough and studied the thin layer of ice along its edge. Nothing about the cattle suggested ordinary cold exposure. The symptoms came too quickly, and too many animals were affected at once. She followed the water. Jacob stayed several steps behind her as she traced the narrow stream southward through the snow. The creek disappeared beneath ice in places and returned farther down the valley, cutting between bare cottonwoods and frozen brush. Nearly half a mile from the pasture, Evelyn stopped. A dead coyote lay near an abandoned drainage ditch. Its body showed no wound. She continued upstream. There, beneath branches arranged to look as though the wind had piled them naturally, she found the first torn sack, then another, then 3 more. The cloth was still damp, Inside remained pieces of crushed poison weed. Someone had dumped the plants where melting snow would carry their toxins into the stream slowly enough that no one would notice until the cattle began to fail. Jacob stood over the sacks without speaking. The poisoned colt had not been an isolated warning. It had been a test. The real target was the herd. For a ranch already struggling through winter, losing hundreds of cattle would mean more than lost animals. It would mean missed payments, unpaid wages, and eventually the sale of land that had belonged to Jacob's family for generations. Evelyn understood immediately. Whoever wanted her journal also understood how to break the man protecting her. They returned to Lone Pine Ranch before afternoon. Jacob closed the south creek to the herd and ordered every drinking trough filled from the north well. Ranch hands worked until dark, hauling clean water across frozen ground. Evelyn moved among the weakened cattle, separating the worst cases and watching for changes in their breathing and pulse. By the following morning, no new animals had fallen sick. By the second day, most of the affected cattle were standing again. The disaster someone had carefully prepared never came. Something changed after that. Cal Turner no longer watched Evelyn as though she were an unwanted stranger. When she entered the barn, men made room for her without being asked. When she inspected the medicine cabinet, no one questioned why. At supper, a plate was left for her before she reached the table. The woman who had arrived during the storm carrying nothing but a frightened child and a dangerous book had saved the livelihood of every man on Lone Pine Ranch. No one called her Trouble anymore. They called her Miss Brooks. Jacob noticed the change, but what stayed with him most was that Evelyn never seemed to notice it herself. She did not ask for praise. She did not remind anyone that they had doubted her. She simply returned to work. Late that evening, Jacob found her repairing a torn saddle blanket beneath the porch lantern, while Lily slept inside. Beyond the yard, the cattle moved quietly beneath a clear winter sky. For the first time since Evelyn arrived, Lone Pine Ranch almost felt peaceful. Then a ranch hand came running from the front gate. Something had been nailed to the fence. Jacob crossed the yard and tore down a white sheet of paper bearing the county seal. The message was short. Lone Pine Ranch had been placed under a seizure claim. Unless the owner satisfied the county's demand within 10 days, the property would be sold at public auction. And attached beneath the notice was a handwritten condition. The claim could be reconsidered if Jacob Hale surrendered Evelyn Brooks and the medical journal she carried. Jacob read the page twice. Then he looked across the dark yard toward the woman who had just saved his herd. Whoever was hunting Evelyn had stopped trying to frighten her. Now they were coming for his home. The seizure notice stayed folded in Jacob's coat pocket for 3 days. He told no one what the handwritten condition said. The cattle still needed feeding. The horses still needed exercise. Fence posts still split beneath the weight of winter ice. Life on a ranch had a way of refusing to stop simply because trouble had learned your name. Evelyn noticed the change in him anyway. He spoke less. He checked the gate more often. And every morning before sunrise, a cup of coffee waited for her beside the kitchen window. The first time, she assumed Mrs. Harper had left it. The second time, she knew better. By the fourth morning, Evelyn no longer looked around to see who had made it. She simply wrapped both hands around the warm enamel cup and stood quietly, while the sky over Lone Pine Ranch turned from black to blue. Neither of them mentioned it. That was how kindness lived between them, without explanation, without debt. One evening, Evelyn found Jacob's old ranch coat hanging beside the back door. The right sleeve had torn nearly 6 inches along the seam, and 2 buttons were missing. She carried it to the kitchen after Lily had gone to sleep. Under the soft glow of a lantern, Evelyn repaired the sleeve with small, careful stitches. She replaced the missing buttons with 2 she found in an old sewing tin and reinforced a worn pocket before returning the coat to its hook. The next morning, Jacob pulled it on. His fingers stopped over the repaired seam. He looked toward the kitchen. Evelyn was cutting bread at the table. He said nothing. But when she stepped outside later, another cup of coffee was waiting on the porch railing. A small smile touched her face before she could stop it. Lily noticed everything. The child had changed since the storm. She no longer woke at every sound of hooves beyond the fence. She followed the old ranch dog from barn to barn and had begun learning the names of the gentler horses. One afternoon, Jacob found her sitting on an overturned bucket near the stable door. She was holding a small wooden horse. He had carved it the night before from a piece of pine. Lily turned it carefully in her hands. Did you make this? Jacob nodded. My wife used to paint them. Lily looked up. Was she nice? The question caught him unprepared. Yes. He looked toward the open barn. She was. Lily seemed satisfied. Then she asked whether he would teach her to ride when the snow melted. For a moment, something old and painful moved through Jacob's face. Then he nodded. If your mother says yes. Lily ran toward the house before he finished the sentence. From the kitchen window, Evelyn had seen the whole exchange. That evening, she and Jacob repaired a broken stretch of fence along the western pasture. The wind had softened, and for once they worked without danger pressing against every hour. Evelyn hammered a nail into place. You still wear your wedding ring. Jacob's hand stopped on the fence post. He looked down at the band. For 3 years, no one had asked him about it. I thought taking it off would mean I was leaving her behind. Evelyn lowered the hammer. I don't think love works that way. He looked at her. She kept her eyes on the fence. There are people we never stop loving. Her voice stayed calm. But sometimes loving them shouldn't keep us from living. The words settled between them. Jacob did not answer. He did not need to. For the first time, Evelyn understood that his silence was not emptiness. It was grief that had never been given permission to change. They walked back toward the house together as the sun disappeared behind the Wyoming hills. Lily met them at the porch holding an old framed photograph she had found while searching the attic for a blanket. Mama, look. Evelyn took the frame. Then she froze. Jacob saw her face and stepped closer. The photograph showed 2 women standing outside a canvas medical tent several years earlier. One was younger, smiling beneath a broad hat. Evelyn. The woman beside her was Sarah Hale, Jacob's late wife. Neither of them spoke. Jacob slowly turned the photograph over. 7 words had been written across the back in Sarah's careful handwriting. She knows the truth. Trust her completely. The ranch seemed to go silent around them. Jacob looked at Evelyn, and for the first time since she knocked on his door, he realized she had not wandered into his life by accident. Jacob read Sarah's words again. She knows the truth. Trust her completely. Evelyn stood beside him on the porch, the old photograph held carefully between both hands. For several seconds, she seemed unable to speak. Then she told him the truth Sarah had kept from him. Years earlier, Evelyn and Sarah had worked together at a traveling medical camp outside Cheyenne. Sarah organized supplies, cared for injured ranch families, and kept records for women who could not afford a doctor. Evelyn delivered babies and treated children who sometimes arrived after traveling half a day by wagon. Sarah had trusted her long before anyone in Whitmore Creek learned her name. After Margaret Whitmore died, Evelyn had gone to Sarah with the first doubts about Dr. Mercer. The medicines did not match the symptoms. The official times did not match Evelyn's notes. And the more questions Sarah asked, the more frightened certain people became. Jacob listened without interrupting. His wife had carried all of that while he believed her spring trips had been nothing more than charity work. Why didn't she tell me? He finally asked. Evelyn looked toward the mountains. Because she thought knowing less would keep you safe. The answer hurt more than he expected. Before he could ask another question, the ranch dog began barking toward the road. Wagon wheels followed. Not 1 set. 3. Jacob stepped off the porch. 2 deputies entered first, riding beside a larger wagon carrying Sheriff Amos Granger. Behind them came Victor Whitmore in a black coat, too fine for ranch work, his polished boots resting above the mud and snow as though even the road was expected to respect him. Victor looked at the house, then at Evelyn. His expression carried no grief for his dead daughter, only satisfaction. Sheriff Granger removed a folded document from inside his coat. Jacob Hale, we have a warrant for the arrest of Evelyn Brooks. Jacob held out his hand. Let me read it. The sheriff hesitated. Victor did not. You're in no position to make demands. Jacob looked at him. This is my land. Granger finally passed over the document. Jacob read slowly. The county seal looked proper. The charge named Evelyn in connection with Margaret Whitmore's death. A judge's signature appeared at the bottom. Then Jacob saw the date. He read it twice. This was signed 3 days ago. Granger said nothing. Judge Collins was in Casper 3 days ago. A deputy shifted uneasily in his saddle. Victor stepped forward. An administrative detail changes nothing. Jacob folded the warrant. It changes whether this paper gives you the right to take someone from my house. Victor's face hardened. You are gambling your ranch on a woman you have known less than 2 weeks. Jacob glanced once toward Evelyn. Lily stood behind her inside the doorway. gripping her mother's skirt. Then he looked back at Victor. No. His voice stayed low. I'm gambling nothing. Victor gave a humorless smile. Your seizure notice says otherwise. So he knew about it. Jacob had never told him. That small mistake did more than any threat could have done. The seizure claim and the warrant came from the same hand. Jacob stepped down from the porch until only a few feet separated him from the sheriff. If you came looking for justice, bring a valid order and I'll read every line. His gaze moved to Victor. If you came for her because someone is afraid of what she knows, you're leaving without her. No one reached for a gun. No one needed to. Cal Turner appeared from the barn carrying a shovel over one shoulder. Ben Carter stepped from beside the forge. One by one, the ranch hands walked across the yard and stopped near Jacob. They carried tools. Nothing more. They did not threaten the sheriff. They simply made certain there would be witnesses to whatever happened next. Sheriff Granger looked around the yard and understood the position he had been placed in. Forcing his way into the house with a questionable warrant would no longer be a quiet arrest. It would become a public mistake. Victor understood it too. His attention shifted past Jacob toward the front window. The leather medical journal rested on the table inside. For the first time, his composure broke. Not much. Only long enough for Evelyn to see where he was looking. He was not afraid of her. He was afraid of the book. Granger pulled the warrant from Jacob's hand. We'll return with the proper authority. Jacob stepped aside. I'll be here. Victor turned toward his wagon. Before climbing aboard, he looked at Evelyn. You should think carefully about how many lives you intend to ruin before this ends. Evelyn did not answer. She had spent too many years being frightened by men who mistook silence for weakness. The wagons rolled away. Only when they disappeared beyond the ridge did the ranch hands return to work. Jacob unfolded the photograph again. If Sarah had known enough to leave a message, then she had probably left more than 7 words. He turned toward Evelyn. She was staring at the road where Victor had vanished. He saw the journal, she said. I know. He'll come back for it. Jacob nodded. Then we find out what Sarah knew before he does. A small piece of paper slipped from inside the folded warrant, still lying near the porch step. Jacob bent and picked it up. The note was unsigned. 5 words had been written across it in hurried ink. Search Sarah's old cedar chest. If you were standing on that porch, would you have defended Evelyn even if it meant risking your ranch? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe Jacob was right to demand proof instead of surrendering to fear, like the video and share this story with someone who would have stood beside him. Jacob read the note once more. For 3 years, Sarah's cedar chest had remained locked in the attic. He had never been able to open it. Now the dead had left him one more door. Jacob stood at the bottom of the attic stairs longer than he meant to. 3 years had passed since Sarah's funeral, and in all that time he had never gone up there for anything that belonged to her. Her dresses still hung beneath linen covers. Her books remained stacked beside the small upstairs window, and against the far wall sat the cedar chest she had brought with her when they married. Jacob had repaired its hinges once. Sarah had laughed and told him the chest would probably outlive them both. Now he climbed the stairs with Evelyn behind him. Neither spoke. Dust lay thick across the attic floor, but the cedar scent remained faintly trapped beneath the cold air. Jacob crossed the room and knelt beside the chest. A narrow blue ribbon was tied around the brass key. Sarah's ribbon. His hand stopped. For one painful moment, the ranch below disappeared. There was only Sarah standing in the kitchen with flour on her cheek. Sarah riding beside him through summer grass. Sarah coughing through the last winter while insisting she would be stronger by spring. Jacob closed his fingers around the key. Evelyn remained several feet behind him. She did not tell him to hurry. She did not tell him Sarah would want this. Grief had taught her that some doors could only be opened by the person standing in front of them. The lock turned. Inside were folded quilts, Sarah's blue shawl, a pair of worn gloves, and bundles of letters tied neatly with string. Jacob touched none of them. At the bottom of the chest lay a leather folder wrapped in white cloth. Across the front, Sarah had written a single instruction. If anything happens to me, give this to Judge Nathan Collins. Jacob looked at Evelyn. Her face had gone pale. He unwrapped the folder. The first pages were copies of medical records. The next were receipts from Mercer's office. Then came handwritten tables comparing official county reports with another set of notes. Evelyn recognized those numbers immediately. They're mine. Jacob looked at her. Your journal? She nodded. Sarah copied them. They spread the documents across the attic floor. The differences appeared slowly at first. A medicine administered shortly after midnight was listed in the official record as being given hours later. A warning Evelyn had written beside Margaret's declining pulse had vanished entirely. One dosage had been reduced on the county copy. Another had been increased. An entry identifying who authorized the medicine had been rewritten in different handwriting. Jacob stared at the pages. Someone changed all of it. Not all. Evelyn pointed to Sarah's copies. Not before she saw it. The realization settled heavily over him. Sarah had known, not merely suspected. Known enough to preserve records no one else thought to save. Beneath the medical papers was an envelope addressed to Jacob. His name was written in the same hand that had labeled every jar in their kitchen and every Christmas package beneath their tree. He broke the seal carefully. The letter was short. Sarah wrote that Evelyn Brooks had been telling the truth. She wrote that the official records surrounding Margaret Whitmore's death had been altered. She wrote that if Jacob ever met Evelyn, he should not ask why she had waited so long to speak. Fear, Sarah explained, was not the same as guilt. Then came the line that stopped him. Truth sometimes walks slower than lies. If she reaches our door before it reaches the courthouse, please give her somewhere safe to stand. Jacob lowered the page. For 3 years, he had thought Sarah's unfinished work belonged to a life that ended with her. Now he understood that she had left something behind that was still moving toward him. Not a memory, a responsibility. Evelyn wiped one tear from her cheek before it could fall farther. She believed me when no one else did. Jacob folded the letter slowly. She believed you might need me. A sound came from below. Fast footsteps. Cal Turner appeared at the attic entrance, breathing hard. Mr. Hale, someone's at the house. Jacob rose. Whitmore? Cal shook his head. Judge Collins. Minutes later, Nathan Collins stood in the main room with melting snow along the shoulders of his coat. Jacob placed Sarah's folder on the table. The judge's weathered expression changed the moment he saw it. I've been looking for these papers for nearly 4 years. Evelyn stared at him. You knew Sarah was investigating? I knew she believed the records had been altered. Collins removed his gloves. What I never had was enough evidence to prove how. Jacob laid Sarah's letter beside the folder. You have it now. The judge read several pages in silence. Then he looked toward Evelyn. This helps you. His voice remained grave. But it doesn't end this. Jacob frowned. What does that mean? Collins reached inside his coat and placed another document on the table. Victor Whitmore had filed a final county claim against Lone Pine Ranch. The property would be sold at public auction in 3 days. They're moving faster because they know they're running out of time, Collins said. Evelyn looked toward the journal. Jacob looked toward Sarah's evidence. For the first time, the 2 sets of records were in the same room. But they still did not have the one thing that could explain why Margaret had been targeted in the first place. Judge Collins gathered Sarah's copies carefully. If there's anything else in that journal, Mrs. Brooks, now is the time to find it. Evelyn said nothing. Her eyes moved toward the damaged binding, toward the hidden fold of paper no one had yet opened. 3 days remained before Lone Pine Ranch would be sold. And somewhere inside the book that had nearly cost Evelyn her life was the reason Victor Whitmore was willing to destroy everything to get it. Judge Collins returned to Lone Pine Ranch the following evening with a leather case full of county records. He placed them across Jacob's kitchen table one by one. Birth registers, medicine logs, property transfers, tax filings. Every document carried an official seal, and almost every one told a different version of the truth. Evelyn sat across from him with her medical journal open beneath the lantern. For more than 2 hours they compared dates. The first discrepancy appeared in Margaret Whitmore's medicine record, then another, then 5 more. A dose Evelyn had written down shortly before midnight had been moved to nearly 3 in the morning in the county file. A note warning that Margaret's pulse had weakened after receiving medicine from Dr. Mercer was missing entirely. The official record claimed Evelyn had delayed treatment. Her journal showed the opposite. She had called for Mercer repeatedly. Sarah's copies confirmed it. Judge Collins removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. This proves the record was altered. Jacob stood beside the window. But not why. No one answered. That question had been following them from the beginning. Why would Victor Whitmore risk destroying a woman's reputation, bribing officials, threatening witnesses, poisoning livestock, and seizing another man's ranch simply to hide a medical mistake? A mistake could ruin a doctor. This was bigger than a doctor. Evelyn looked down at the journal. Her fingers moved toward the damaged binding. For years, She had refused to open the hidden fold unless she had no other choice. Now there was nowhere left to run. She slid a small knife beneath the inner stitching and carefully loosened a strip of leather. A thin piece of folded parchment slipped onto the table. Jacob recognized the shape immediately. The paper they had glimpsed days earlier had been only the outer fold. Inside it was something else. Evelyn opened the first sheet. The handwriting belonged to Margaret Whitmore. Judge Collins leaned closer. The note had been written less than a week before Margaret went into labor. It was short. Margaret wrote that she feared something was wrong with the medicine Dr. Mercer had prescribed during the final months of her pregnancy. She had become weak after taking it. Her heart raced. Her hands trembled. When she stopped taking it, the symptoms eased. When her father insisted she continue, they returned. At the bottom of the page, Margaret had written a single request. If anything happened to her or the baby, Evelyn Brooks was not to be blamed. The room became still. Jacob looked toward Evelyn. She did not move. For years, she had carried the words of a dead woman who had tried to protect her. Judge Collins read the note twice. "This changes the case." Evelyn shook her head. Not enough. She opened the second folded sheet. It was a prescription copy. Dr. Mercer's name appeared at the bottom. But beside the dosage instruction, written in another hand, were 3 initials. Victor Whitmore. Jacob frowned. "A rancher doesn't prescribe medicine." "No," Evelyn said. "He gives orders to the doctor who owes him money." Judge Collins looked up sharply. "What money?" Evelyn reached deeper into the leather binding and removed one last paper. This one was not medical. It was a property memorandum. Margaret had discovered that Victor had secretly mortgaged a large section of Whitmore land after years of failed cattle deals. The debt was enormous. To refinance it, he needed control of property that legally belonged to Margaret through her mother's estate. But Margaret had refused to sign the transfer. If she lived, Victor could not legally take the land without her consent. If she died before changing her will, the situation became far easier to manipulate. Jacob stared at the paper. So she wasn't inconvenient because she was sick. Evelyn looked at him. She was inconvenient because she owned something he needed. The meaning of everything else changed at once. Margaret's death. Mercer's altered records. The campaign against Evelyn. The stolen pages. The threats. The poisoned water. The seizure notice. Victor had never feared the accusation that Evelyn killed his daughter. He feared proof that his daughter had known what he was doing. Judge Collins slowly gathered the papers into separate piles. "We have altered medical records. We have Sarah's copies. We have Margaret's statement. We have property records that establish motive." He looked toward Evelyn. "And we have you." She understood. The journal alone could be attacked. Sarah was gone. Margaret was gone. But Evelyn had been there. For 4 years, that had made her a target. Now it made her the witness Victor had never managed to silence. Jacob came to the table. "You don't have to do this tomorrow." Evelyn looked at him. "If I don't, he'll keep doing it." "That's not what I meant." His voice stayed gentle. "You don't owe this town courage because it denied you kindness." She lowered her eyes. That was the difference between Jacob and every person who had demanded something from her. He was giving her a choice, not asking for sacrifice. She looked toward the stairs where Lily slept, then toward Sarah's letter. "I spent 4 years teaching my daughter that telling the truth mattered." She closed the journal. "I can't teach her to hide from it forever." Jacob nodded. "Then I'll go with you." "No." He paused. Evelyn reached across the table and rested her hand over his. "You'll walk beside me." Something changed in his expression. Not surprise. Understanding. She was not asking him to save her. She was asking him not to let her stand alone. Before dawn, Judge Collins left for town carrying certified copies of the documents beneath his coat. Jacob saddled 2 horses, one for himself, one for Evelyn. When they stepped into the yard, Cal Turner was waiting beside his horse. Ben Carter stood behind him. Then another ranch hand appeared. And another. Jacob frowned. "I didn't ask anyone to come." Cal settled his hat lower against the cold. "Didn't figure you needed to." No one smiled. They simply mounted. Lily remained at the ranch with Mrs. Harper, wrapped in a blanket on the porch as Evelyn bent down to hold her. "Are you coming back?" Evelyn kissed her forehead. "Yes." For the first time, she said it without doubt. The riders left Lone Pine Ranch beneath a pale winter sky. Ahead of them, the courthouse bell began to ring. The public auction was starting. Victor Whitmore believed he was about to take Jacob's land. He had no idea that the woman he had spent 4 years trying to silence was riding straight toward him with the one thing power feared most: the truth, with witnesses. The courthouse square was already crowded when Jacob and Evelyn reached town. Ranchers stood along the wooden railings. Merchants had left their shops. Women gathered beneath the awnings while the courthouse bell rang above them. At the center of the square, an auctioneer arranged papers on a narrow platform. Victor Whitmore stood beside him. Sheriff Amos Granger was only a few steps away. Everything had been prepared as though Lone Pine Ranch already belonged to someone else. Then people noticed Evelyn. The whispers began before she dismounted. Some stared openly. Others looked away. A few of the same women who had once trusted Evelyn with their children moved closer together, as though her presence alone made them uncomfortable. Jacob stepped down from his horse. He did not offer Evelyn his hand. He knew she did not need help standing. Instead, he remained beside her, exactly where she had asked him to be. Cal Turner, Ben Carter, and the ranch hands stopped behind them. Victor watched the group approach. His confidence did not disappear, but Evelyn saw something in his eyes. Recognition. He knew she had returned for a reason. The auctioneer lifted his gavel. By authority of the county, the property known as Lone Pine Ranch will be offered for sale in satisfaction of outstanding claims. Not yet. Judge Nathan Collins stepped from the courthouse doors. The square went silent. He carried Sarah's leather folder beneath one arm and a stack of certified county records beneath the other. Sheriff Granger frowned. Judge Collins, the auction has already been authorized. Collins walked to the platform, and that authorization is now under review. Victor stepped forward. On what grounds? The judge looked directly at him. Fraud. The word moved through the crowd like a cold wind. Collins placed the first document on the table. This hearing concerns 2 matters: the seizure claim against Lone Pine Ranch and the criminal accusations made against Evelyn Brooks following the death of Margaret Whitmore. Evelyn felt every face turn toward her. For years, that attention had made her want to disappear. This time, she remained still. Judge Collins opened her medical journal. He began with the simplest evidence: dates, times, medicine dosages. The original notes Evelyn had written during Margaret's labor were compared with the county records filed afterward. One dosage had been changed, then another. A warning about Margaret's weakening pulse had been removed. The time Evelyn requested additional medical help had been moved by hours. Each alteration supported the story that Evelyn had neglected Margaret. Each original entry showed the opposite. Collins then opened Sarah Hale's copies. The crowd recognized Jacob's wife's handwriting. Sarah had preserved the same numbers before the county records changed. Victor's face tightened. Copies prove nothing. Judge Collins nodded. By themselves, perhaps? He lifted Margaret's handwritten statement. But this is not a copy. Evelyn could hear someone in the crowd begin to cry before the judge even finished reading. Margaret had written that she feared the medicine she was being given. She had written that Evelyn was not to be blamed if anything happened to her or her child, and she had described symptoms that disappeared when she stopped taking the medicine and returned when her father demanded she resume it. When Collins finished, no one spoke. He placed the prescription beside the statement. Dr. Mercer. The physician stood near the edge of the crowd. His face had turned pale. Come forward. Mercer did not move at first. Sheriff Granger looked at him. Doctor. Slowly, Mercer approached the platform. Judge Collins showed him the altered records. Is this your signature? Mercer swallowed. Yes. And these changes? I don't remember. Collins placed Evelyn's journal beside Sarah's copy. Then perhaps this will help. Mercer's eyes moved across the pages. His hands began to shake. Victor stepped forward. This is absurd. A frightened woman, a dead woman's papers, and old medical notes do not justify stopping a lawful sale. Judge Collins did not raise his voice. No one asked you a question, Mr. Whitmore. Victor stopped. For the first time, he looked less like the most powerful man in the county and more like someone discovering that power had limits. Collins turned back to Mercer. Did Evelyn Brooks alter the county records? No. The answer came quietly. Did Sarah Hale? No. Did you? Mercer closed his eyes. Seconds passed. Then his shoulders dropped. Yes. A murmur spread through the square. Sheriff Granger stared at him. Mercer's voice shook. I changed them. Victor moved toward him. Think carefully. Mercer looked at him. Perhaps for the first time in years, fear was no longer stronger than exhaustion. "You told me to." The square erupted in whispers. Victor's face changed. "He's lying." Mercer shook his head. "You paid my debts. You told me Margaret was confused. You said the medicine would keep her calm until she signed the property transfer." Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. Even after everything she had discovered, hearing the truth spoken aloud was different. Mercer continued, "When she refused, you told me to increase the dose." Sheriff Granger stepped closer. Victor backed away. Judge Collins raised one hand, quieting the crowd. The property memorandum was placed beside the medical records. It showed the debt against Whitmore land. It showed Margaret's legal interest through her mother's estate. It showed why her signature mattered. Then Collins produced the seizure documents for Lone Pine Ranch. Several of the same officials who had processed Victor's disputed property filings had also approved the claim against Jacob. The pattern was no longer hidden. Lone Pine Ranch had not been seized because Jacob had suddenly failed to pay what he owed. The claim had been used as pressure, a way to force him to surrender Evelyn and the journal. Judge Collins looked at the auctioneer. "This sale is suspended." Victor stepped forward. "You cannot do this." "I already have." The judge signed an order across the bottom of the seizure document. "The claim against Lone Pine Ranch will remain frozen pending a full audit." For the first time that morning, Jacob allowed himself to breathe. But Evelyn was still watching Mercer. There was one question left. Judge Collins asked it. Did Evelyn Brooks cause Margaret Whitmore's death? Mercer looked toward Evelyn. She had imagined this moment for years. In some versions, she had screamed at him. In others, she had demanded an apology. Now, she wanted only the truth. Mercer lowered his head. No. The answer was barely louder than the wind. Judge Collins made him repeat it. No. She tried to save her. The words crossed the square. They reached the church elders, the mothers who had closed their doors, the sheriff who had questioned Evelyn for less than 10 minutes, the men who had called her dangerous. Evelyn stood without moving. She did not smile. She did not cry. She simply let the truth exist where the lie had lived for 4 years. Sheriff Granger removed the warrant from his coat. He looked at Evelyn once. Then he tore the paper in half. This should never have been issued. Victor turned toward the street. 2 county deputies moved into his path. Judge Collins spoke calmly. Victor Whitmore, you are being detained pending charges of fraud, conspiracy, destruction of evidence, coercion, and further investigation into the death of Margaret Whitmore. No gun was drawn. No one needed to be dragged through the mud. Victor's punishment began with something far worse for a man who had built his life on influence. Everyone could finally see him clearly. The people of Whitmore Creek watched in silence as the deputies led him toward the courthouse. Then they looked at Evelyn, some with shame, some with sorrow, some unable to meet her eyes at all. The church elder who had once refused her entry removed his hat. I'm sorry, Mrs. Brooks. Evelyn looked at him. 4 years earlier, those words might have saved her home. Now they could only acknowledge what had been taken. She nodded once. It was enough. Jacob came to stand beside her. You can stop running now. Evelyn looked toward him. A quiet warmth appeared in her eyes. I think I stopped the night you opened the door. If Evelyn's courage moved you, tell us in the comments what you would have done if an entire town had judged you before hearing the truth. And if you believe kindness can change a life long before justice arrives, like this story, share it, and subscribe for more Western stories about courage, dignity, and second chances. The crowd slowly began to leave. Lily came running from Mrs. Harper's wagon and slipped her small hand into Jacob's. She looked up at him. Can we go home now? Jacob smiled. Yes. He thought she meant Lone Pine Ranch. He did not yet understand that, to Lily, home had already become something much more than land. Spring came quietly to Lone Pine Ranch. The snow disappeared first from the hilltops, then from the fence lines, until the valley slowly turned green again. Calves followed their mothers through the pasture. Horses rolled in the warming earth. The creek that had nearly destroyed Jacob's herd ran clear beneath the cottonwoods. For the first time in years, the ranch no longer felt like a place waiting for something it had lost. It felt alive. The investigation in Whitmore Creek continued long after the auction was stopped. Dr. Mercer admitted to falsifying medical records and accepting money from Victor Whitmore. The county opened a wider investigation into the property transfers and seizure claims connected to Victor's deaths. Sheriff Granger resigned before summer. A month later, he rode alone to Lone Pine Ranch. He removed his hat before speaking to Evelyn. "I should have listened." There was no excuse in his voice, only regret. Evelyn studied him for a moment. 4 years earlier, she would have begged to hear those words. Now she understood that an apology could not return the nights Lily had cried herself to sleep or restore the home they had abandoned. Still, she accepted it, not because the past no longer mattered, because she no longer wanted the past deciding what she carried into the future. Others came too, women who had crossed the street rather than meet her eyes, a church elder who had once refused her entry, a mother whose child Evelyn had delivered in a snowstorm years before. Some apologized. Some could barely speak. Evelyn never demanded humiliation in return. She had spent too much of her life being judged to build her new life on judging others. By early summer, she opened a small treatment room in the eastern side of the ranch house. There was no grand sign, only a clean table, shelves of medicine, fresh linens, and a wooden box where families could leave whatever payment they could afford. Sometimes it held coins, sometimes eggs. Once, someone left a jar of honey. No one was turned away. Lily changed faster than the seasons. The frightened little girl who had once watched every road for riders now ran across the ranch yard with the old dog following behind her. Jacob kept his promise. On the first warm Saturday of spring, he lifted her onto the back of a gentle mare. Lily gripped the saddle with both hands. "What if she doesn't like me?" Jacob adjusted the stirrup. "Then you give her time. What if she still doesn't trust me? Then you give her more." Lily considered that carefully. "Is that what you did with Mama?" Jacob looked toward the house. Evelyn stood on the porch watching them. A smile touched his face. "Something like that." The lesson ended when the mare stopped to eat grass and refused to move. Lily laughed so loudly that Jacob laughed with her. The sound surprised him, not because he had forgotten how, because for the first time, it no longer felt borrowed from another life. Later that evening, Jacob walked alone toward the cottonwood tree on the rise above the ranch. Sarah's grave rested beneath it. For 3 years, he had come there carrying the same grief. This time, he carried a small wooden box. Inside lay his wedding ring and Sarah's final letter. He knelt beside the white marker. The grass moved softly around him. "I thought taking this off meant I was leaving you." His voice was low. "I know better now." He removed the ring. For a moment, the pale mark beneath it looked strange against his hand. He placed the ring inside the box beside Sarah's letter. "I don't love you less." The words came easier than he expected. "I just don't think you ever wanted me to stop living." He closed the box and rested it beside the marker. Then he stood. The wind moved through the cottonwood leaves. Jacob waited for guilt to come. It did not. Only gratitude. When he walked back toward the ranch house, he did not look over his shoulder. Several weeks later, Jacob entered the spare room and found 2 boxes near the bed. Evelyn was folding Lily's clothes. His chest tightened before he could stop it. "You're leaving." She looked up. There was no accusation in his voice, only a question he was afraid to ask. Evelyn placed the dress in the box. "The case is over. The town knows the truth. Lily and I don't need to hide anymore." Jacob nodded slowly. He had always known this day might come. Lone Pine Ranch had been shelter, a job, safety. He had never wanted kindness to become a chain. "If you want to go," he said, "I'll have a wagon ready by morning." Evelyn watched him carefully. "You wouldn't ask me to stay?" Jacob looked toward the open window. "I want you to stay." He met her eyes. "But wanting isn't the same as owning." Something softened in her face. Jacob continued, "You came here because everyone else took choices away from you." His voice remained steady. "I won't be another man who does that." For several seconds, Evelyn said nothing. Then she smiled. "The boxes aren't for leaving." Jacob frowned. She lifted one. "I'm moving our things out of the spare room." "Where?" "Into the rooms beside the kitchen." He still did not understand. Evelyn stepped closer. "The ones that feel like ours." The silence between them changed. She looked around the house, at the table where Jacob had left coffee before sunrise, at the patched coat still hanging beside the door, at the window where Lily had first watched the road in fear and now watched for Jacob returning from the pasture. "I spent years believing a home was something another person could take from me." She reached for his hand. "Then I came here." Jacob closed his fingers gently around hers. Evelyn's eyes filled, but this time the tears held no fear. This stopped being a place to hide a long time ago. She smiled. It became home the day you opened the door. Jacob did not answer with a promise. He simply held her hand a little tighter. From outside came the sound of running footsteps. Lily burst through the doorway, cheeks flushed from the afternoon sun. She stopped when she saw their joined hands. Then she looked up at Jacob. "Mr. Hale?" He turned toward her. Lily hesitated. For once, the fearless child seemed uncertain. "If Mama says we're staying." She swallowed. "Can I call you Pa?" Jacob's breath caught. He looked at Evelyn. She gave the smallest nod. Then Jacob knelt until he was level with Lily. His eyes had already filled. "I'd be honored." Lily threw both arms around his neck. Jacob held her close. Evelyn covered her mouth as she laughed through tears. Outside, the evening sun stretched gold across Lone Pine Ranch. Years earlier, Jacob Hale had believed his heart had been buried beneath a cottonwood tree with the woman he loved. He had been wrong. Sarah had never asked him to bury it. She had only trusted that one day, when someone frightened and forgotten knocked on his door, he would still remember how to open it.